Today, we will review our meeting minutes. We will discuss the naming of a new Wake County high school that I'm very excited for. We'll continue our discussion of area crowding, and we will have the new business and 3-month forecast segments as we always do. First up, has anyone had the opportunity to review the April 2023 meeting minutes, and if so, is there a motion?
Yes. I move that we accept the minutes as proposed.
There's a motion to accept the April 2023 meeting minutes as proposed. Ms. Edmonds has made the motion. Ms. Caulfield has seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the minutes have been adopted. So we will go right into our agenda and welcome back Ms. Betty Parker. Ms. Parker, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Haggerty. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure to be with you as always. As you know, we've acquired a site for our H14 high school in the town of Morrisville on Wake Tech's RTP campus. We have completed the closing of all the pieces of property we need for that assemblage. In accordance with board policy, the following names have been presented to you for your consideration. One is Paramount Parkway High School. The site fronts on Paramount Parkway. It will be one of the road accesses, probably the main one for the school. Parkside High School, as with Parkside Elementary and Middle, this community is adjacent to the Research Triangle Park, and Parkside has been a reference to that. It helps identify the area in which it's located. And then Morrisville High School. It's obviously located within the town of Morrisville, and it's identified because it does help in its location. Under board policy, there are some limits on what we can consider. It's to be named in accordance with the school's geographic location or similar site-specific identifiers, such as road, streets, natural or historical features. A couple of comments for consideration, particularly for our board members who've not gone through this very much yet. In the past, board by board have varying positions on whether they want to name it with a town's name in the title. I think it's up to each individual board. It's gone both ways, depending on board input. There are also some concerns with naming it for a town like Morrisville, because there's often the implicit expectation that if I live in Morrisville, I get to go to that school. And I think we've all tried to make people aware that school assignment is never a guarantee. Similarly, when you name it Parkside, even though the track for this school will be at Parkside Middle, there are a couple miles between the sites, and the same student assignment concerns might arise. If I've been to Parkside Elementary and Middle, am I entitled to go to Parkside High? So those discussions arise. So on the one hand, you've got good locational information. On the other, it's always difficult to judge expectations. Paramount Parkway is a fairly neutral name, which is why staff recommended it, and our recommendation is a conversation starter. Paramount Parkway is a very short road, and while it's well known to businesses in the area, perhaps not so much to parents. So unfortunately, perfect name suggestions are rare. This is no exception, and we would welcome your input. Our intention is for the Facilities Committee to choose a name that it will support, and at that point we'll bring it forward to the board for consideration of naming at a future meeting. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. And I think Ms. Parker did a great job of summarizing a lot of the pros and cons around the names. I don't know how many of you have been approached by people sometimes with, well, why don't I get to go to this school? I live in this city. I'm paying these city taxes. Therefore, I should go to this school. And that's not the way things work. Ms. Mahaffey?
My question was going to be, Mr. Haggerty, what have you, as the area representative, heard from residents of Morrisville and their town council?
Yeah, so I know that really, without question, the majority of the residents and the town council, they feel a lot of civic pride around the idea of a Morrisville high school and would like to see it named Morrisville High School. Even when we had the Wake Early College at RTP, which was obviously going to have an early college name, there was movements to try to name the early college Morrisville High School. In regards to the other names, we do have Parkside Elementary, Parkside Middle. It's not on the same campus, but it's not too far away. You know, you could continue with a Parkside High School, but there could be some confusion about the site name. And then if we ever change the assignment patterns where one or two of the Parksides don't float at the Parkside High School, that can be troubling. The Paramount Parkway, it is on Paramount Parkway. Paramount Parkway is, I guess you could describe it as a fairly new branding of that area. It's mostly like an industrial area over there that some developers have come in and they've done a lot to, there's a Paramount Theater now for like meeting and office space. But I think a lot of it was branded around that development, and I don't know what the future of that development will be. But it is the road name, so even if the park goes away, the road will stay the same.
I'm just going to say PPHS is not going to look good on their branding.
I had not thought of that, but I'll bet a lot of high school students.
Say what you always say when you come up with this. She was a middle school teacher. She always reminds me of this. She always thinks of what middle school is.
Yeah.
Very creative.
My take on it, working with folks in this area, is that I think the community would all rally around Morrisville High School. So that would be my recommendation to you. Ms. Edmonds.
I do not object to that. I appreciate we're going to have that constant battle of folks assuming ownership of that and that they get to go there because they live there, and that I understand that challenge, but it's not so much so that we shouldn't do it. I support that.
Thank you, Ms.
You're
Edmonds.
welcome.
Any other comments?
Question.
Yes.
How often, well, I guess there are schools that are named after people. And was that in consideration, or?
So, Ms. Parker, do you want to explain about the history of namings and how our policies change?
I'm not that old, but
In recent history.
but I do know that in the last nearly 18 years I've been here, our naming policy does not include the opportunity to name for people. So it's been steered away from that, and I think the reason for changing some school names that we have had recently point to why. So in this case, they found it safest to refer to street names, geographic features. Middle Creek is near Middle Creek. There are a number that are similar that way, but it's not appropriate under board policy. If the board felt strongly about it, they could waive board policy, but scrutiny of the name chosen would have to be fairly significant, I think, to assure that there's no unintended attention that might be brought.
Okay. I'm just curious.
Ms. Caulfield?
Is there any other high school that are in Morrisville?
Well, technically, we do have our Early College of Information and Biotechnology, which sits on that same campus, the Wake RTP campus. But there is no other high school in Morrisville, and that's, again, one of the reasons I think why the town and the community is so excited about having one with the Morrisville name. All right. Well, I was trying to think if there was any other points. I will say that this particular high school is very innovative, too, in terms of the cooperation and everything that we were able to achieve, we were able to realize with the county and the town governments. There's a lot of shared facilities shared with the town of Morrisville, their parks, athletic facilities, also with the town of Cary, and the Wake Tech campus. So, it really does have a direct connection to the town of Morrisville, maybe a little bit above and beyond some of our other schools. And I will tell you, last night, they had a budget hearing for the county that took place not far from this site at the Wake Tech RTP campus. And some of the county commissioners were remarking about how impressed they were that we were able to find and build a school on this footprint with all of the kind of complex interlocal agreements and still find a way to make it happen. So I think we're off to a good start, and I would recommend the name Morrisville High School.
I'd support that.
Is that a motion from Ms. Mahaffey?
I'm not on the committee, but sure. If I can.
I'll take one from our committee, or
Yeah.
Ms. Caulfield.
So that's not a motion?
I can't.
Then I'll make a motion.
Motion by Ms. Caulfield.
Second.
Second by Ms. Edmonds. All in favor of naming the new high school 14, Morrisville High School, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, thank you, Ms. Parker.
So by that, I take it to mean that this committee supports a motion recommending that the board approve the naming of the high school as Marshall.
As so stated.
Okay, and we'll submit that accordingly. It should come forward to the second meeting in June. We typically leave one meeting in between in case there is any public feedback or opportunity for comment that the board would like to receive before moving ahead. Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Parker. All right. Well, moving along, the next item on our agenda is a greater examination of some of the same crowding issues that we've been talking about. We'll hear again from, I think it'll be led by Ms. Rory, Mr. Carrozza as well. Looks like he's down there to assist. So once they are ready, instead of the Area Crowding Considerations 101, you can see we're taking the AP course, the Advanced Honor with a little plus designation beside it. So. All right, we will turn it over to your team as soon as you're ready.
Well, thank you. So what we are presenting today is Area Crowding Considerations 101 Plus. We did present this in November at the Facilities Committee meeting, so we wanted to bring it back for the new board members. We also have additional items that we'd like to bring your attention from the last Facilities Committee. I'm joined today by Ms. Marcella Rory and Ms. Susan Pulliam, and I'm going to kick it off to them. And if you have any questions, if we could hold them till the end, that would be great, and then this way we can make sure we get through the presentation in its entirety and then address any issues or concerns you may have.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you all.
As we shared last fall, we continue to face ongoing residential growth that is outpacing the available capacity that we have in our schools. Today we want to revisit and review information on 3 aspects of crowding to bring that concern into focus. Share with you the steps that are taken at a staff level to address crowding, and the stage at which crowding recommendations must come to the board for additional action. This information will help you understand the impacts of crowding, the tools we use to manage crowding, and the thresholds for which action must be taken. Each school has a specific capacity that determines the number of students that should be assigned to the school. When the number of students that are assigned to a school exceeds the school's capacity, the school begins to experience crowding. We regularly evaluate the crowding data for all schools. There are many impacts that result from crowded and/or under-enrolled schools. Some of those could include inequitable learning environment experiences like a higher teacher-to-student ratio. These higher ratios limit teaching flexibility by creating furniture spacing concerns, which can also challenge the ingress and egress of the teaching spaces. Crowding can create classroom management issues with the potential for increased disruption and distractions. Under-enrolled schools would need additional months of employment to have programs similar to other schools. We must meet the limit for legislative class size averages across the district. Elementary schools experiencing K-3 crowding would need waivers to increase the number of students per class. These waivers must be balanced elsewhere in the district by classes that have fewer students per class. Residential growth spurts across the district leads to unbalanced crowding across the district. Core spaces at crowded schools may require additional time to serve meals, challenge available seating space for students to eat. They may have an insufficient number of restroom facilities for students and staff, which impacts the instructional time. Crowded playfields and playground equipment leads to undue wear and tear. Changing classroom use assignments may challenge new special needs placement opportunities. The campus would also have inadequate parking for staff, students, and volunteers. And our favorite topic, transportation. Transportation's yellow bus routes experience additional challenges when we have routes that need more buses and drivers for overcrowded CAP schools, and additional inefficiencies when we have partially filled routes for overflow or under-enrolled schools. These transportation challenges typically result in more parent drivers, which extends the parent queuing on-site and off-site. Building overutilization and operational inefficiencies limits the opportunities to access the buildings for regular maintenance, repairs, and upgrades. Crowded schools that may be capped or have base reassignments limits family choice opportunities. When evaluating options for dealing with area crowding, our goal is to make recommendations that will allow for longer-term stability for the community, considers transportation challenges, and provides the best educational environment for our students. We are able to reduce area crowding by using several management tools. We increase available capacity by constructing new schools, renovating existing schools and adding capacity where possible, or adding trailers where possible. We provide magnet schools and encourage consideration of magnet school choices. Our magnet schools not only help reduce high concentration of poverty, promotes diversity and school integration, provides innovative and/or expanded educational opportunities, they also help maximize the use of school facilities. We make recommendations that adjust the student assignment areas to help reduce crowding in overcrowded schools and increase utilization of under-enrolled schools. After evaluating proximate schools to determine if there's available capacity, we make recommendations for enrollment caps and overflow schools. And you've heard me say this probably a million times. Capping is a temporary measure that allows us to implement the other tools. Capping should be a short-term tool because it is not a solution, as crowding is fluid, neighborhoods age out, and growth patterns change. When an area's growth is expected to continue increasing, changing the school calendar from traditional to year-round would allow us to realize additional capacity. Staff brings forward the membership forecast each year that considers short-term and long-term residential development, plans for other educational delivery methods that affect our market share, like new charter schools, growth patterns, and crowding and projected new capacity. Updates are provided annually on schools that are included in the new construction and renovation in our capital improvement plan. This graph shows the 2021-22 school capacity in gray, the 2021-22 PMR2 Principals Monthly Report, Month 2, and the 2022-23 by grade membership as of PMR 1, or Principals Monthly Report 1. And keep in mind, this was from last fall. Current trends show the gap between membership and available seats. Please note that while the graph reflects a surplus of seats at middle school, there is still area crowding at our middle school level. When the legislative class size mandate was implemented, elementary crowding numbers immediately rose and has not helped us reduce the number of capped elementary schools. Capping has been a method to help manage crowding in schools and is brought to the board annually with recommendations for capping and uncapping schools. As of the 2022-23 school year, we have 20 capped elementary schools, 2 capped middle schools, and 3 capped high schools. And as you remember, this past February, I think it was, we uncapped one elementary school and immediately capped another elementary school. So that number has stayed pretty static. When school capping recommendations are made, we provide the impact data that includes the number of additional buses needed and the cost to accommodate the new caps. As we have heard in numerous transportation presentations, there are many strains on transportation that will challenge its regular yellow bus operation and our ability to cap additional schools. So we want to reiterate, capping is not a viable long-term solution and is no longer really a viable short-term solution to address crowding. This map identifies the capped elementary schools with their attendance areas in red. This is a good reminder that the most concentrated areas of capped elementary schools are in the Western Wake planning area, where there's still a strong residential growth that has been sustained for a number of years. There are a few exceptions to those caps, as shown in other high-growth areas. This map identifies the capped middle schools with their attendance areas in red. The two capped middle schools are also concentrated in the Western Wake planning area, where there's the sustained residential growth. This map identifies the capped high schools with their attendance areas in red. Two capped high schools are concentrated in the Western Wake planning area, and one capped high school is in the Northeast Wake planning area. As we just mentioned, changing an elementary or middle school calendar from traditional to year-round would typically increase the number of students a school is able to serve by approximately 20% to 30%. For multi-track year-round schools, 3 of the 4 tracks attend school at any given time, while 1 track is always tracked out. While multi-track year-round schools provide more capacity, there are challenges to operating on a year-round calendar. There's year-round elementary schools need to have a feeder middle school with capacity. Year-round schools have to have more consistent wear and tear on the buildings. They require year-round transportation and bus drivers. And they may require additional staff to support the school. Please note, our CIP program assumptions affirm that we will deliver new school construction projects on a schedule that provides the board with the option to open the new school on a traditional or year-round calendar. So that is still part of our program assumptions. Our goal is to clarify the process for addressing area crowding and set expectations on when change may need to occur at a school and what that change could potentially be. The process must consider current conditions, future relief, transportation limitations, and provide a runway for addressing the needs of our families. Similar to weather alerts, we are going to refer to the crowding thresholds for which consideration of change is necessary as watch, warning, and action. Reviewing solutions to address crowding is a school and multi-departmental effort that requires the input and evaluation from a broad base of school system expertise, as the effects are wide-ranging. Our elementary and middle school utilization target is 95% crowding and 97.5% crowding at high schools. These percentages provide flexibility when we need to make new special education student placements, when we need to accommodate students moving back to their base schools, and when schools need to increase or decrease the number of classrooms at a certain grade level as the cohort sizes change. We monitor weekly membership reports for crowding changes at all schools, and specifically at capped and overflow schools to determine if the school crowding is stable. While a crowded school may be able to operate their K-3 classes at a +3 ratio, the district averages for K-3 class size legislation must be met. Therefore, those overages must be offset by the ratios at other schools somewhere else in the district. We make recommendations for adjustments to the base assignment areas that will help reduce crowding in some schools or increase utilization in other schools with the enrollment plan. We meet with the municipalities annually to review their projected short-term, about 7 years, and their long-term, up to 20 years, residential development that will impact growth projections proximate to particular schools. Planned new schools, renovations, or trailers can benefit the CAP school by providing additional proximate capacity. When a school is approaching the watch threshold or the 95% crowding, school-based measures can be employed to help accommodate crowding. As you see in the chart to the left, at this threshold, these measures have been taken to help address the school's crowding. This threshold must consider whether there's new residential development in the area, is there proximate in-county migration, are there program or management changes at a school? Are there proximate market share changes, like is there going to be a new charter school opening or an existing charter school closing? Or if they're getting some proximate new private schools that are opening. Are there school site concerns? For example, a scheduled CIP renovation at a school or at a proximate school. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Just got distracted a second there. Or proximate new school construction that would increase available proximate capacity. Also, are there significant numbers of trailers that are at or nearing their useful life of 35 years? When a school is at the warning threshold, or 95 to 110% crowding, specific measures from the previous slide to reduce crowding have already been taken, but the school's crowding level is still increasing. If the level is 95% to 110% crowding, additional actions can be taken to reduce crowding. For example, the number of applications accepted for the crowded school can be limited. The number of transfers into the crowded school can be limited, but more transfers out of the crowded school can be considered. We propose reassignment when no crowding relief is on the horizon. School-based staff increase magnet marketing, and our marketing staff volunteer to go out to the open houses at the crowded schools to share what other opportunities and programs are available through our magnet program. We also make recommendations for capping crowded schools. If a school is at or above the action threshold, or 110% crowding, then additional action needs to be taken to address crowding to meet the needs of the students and legislative requirements. Action at this stage focuses on reassignment for the future or the following year enrollment plan, capping or uncapping recommendations, and when no new capacity is on the horizon and there is insufficient existing capacity in the area, a calendar change recommendation. The goal is to avoid getting to this point with targeted actions at the earlier thresholds. But, as we have seen specifically during the past 2 years, predicting family choices is not always possible. If the crowding is less than 85%, we need to determine what additional measures will attract students and families to those schools to increase their utilization. Considerable collaboration at a staff level is required at every stage of addressing area crowding. Some of the stages require staff collaboration and board review, approval, and action. Those include the finalization of the enrollment plan, review of the annual facilities utilization report, approving recommendations for capping and removing caps, and any potential calendar change recommendations if applicable.
That concludes the presentation that we made back in the November Facilities Committee. So all the slides moving forward are now new slides that will be addressing the conversations that we've had in our previous facilities committee meeting.
The plus.
Yeah, the plus. So the class size limit for grades 4 and 5, which was discussed at our last facilities committee meeting, which is specifically House Bill 259. The most recent version we have to date is version 3, talking about section 7.21D. Okay? So to just give you some feedback or information from our previous presentations that we made. Back in 2018-19, when the K-3 class size limits were first imposed, the impact on Wake County schools was we lost about 9,500 seats, which if you equate that into the number of schools based on a 616 capacity model, would have been equivalent to 16 elementary schools at that time. As Ms. Rory shared, there were many options that we've used to address the K-3 class size legislation throughout the district, one of those being capping. And to just give you some perspective, 14 of our 20 capped elementary schools have been capped since 2018. So looking at the impact it would have today, we had previously given you some information and data on the impact it would have today. So looking at that, we would say 74 fewer classrooms, which would be equivalent of 1,760 less seats we would have impacted today. Now, that doesn't project forward for the next several years. And it also doesn't take into account the impact on K-5. This would just be a straight 4-5 impact. One of the impacts we've been able to use as part of our K-3 class size legislation is the ability for larger class sizes at 4 and 5 to balance the need for, or not to need, additional teachers at our K-3 class sizes, or to fund additional teachers at our K-3 classes in order to deal with that legislation. So there's a lot on this slide and I'll go slow. Okay? So here we have a building that has a 616 capacity current. That would be a traditional calendar school. It would have 32 capacity classrooms. Okay? When you break down those classrooms, it allots for 6 classrooms at each grade, K through 3. And then in 4th and 5th grade, it would allot for 4 classes. Adding that up, that's 32 classrooms. So based on the class size limits, 18 in a class times 6 would be 108 students you can hold at kindergarten, 96 in 1st, 102 in 2nd and 3rd. And then with a class size limit of 24 in 4th and 5th, you would have a limit of 96 students. Any additional classrooms in the building are considered non-capacity classrooms, and they're used for other purposes, which we'll talk about soon. Since the number of students in cohorts don't come in perfect sizes, and we'll talk about this in the next slide, the ability to have the 4-5 classroom flexibility with their class sizes has offered us the ability to flex with those cohort changes through time. Without that flex, we would be forced to have about 96 students per grade level to properly matriculate from K to 5th grade, which we all know in a perfect world doesn't really happen here. So looking at similar situation, but we're using actual student numbers from a school. This particular school has 99 students in kindergarten, which would require 6 classes at 18 students per class. 1st grade would be 112, which would require 7 classes. 2nd grade, 115, which would require 7 classes. 3rd grade, 117, 7 classes. Now, 4th grade with 111 students, without the 24 cap class, we could have 4 classes of 27 to 28 students per class. However, with this new legislation recommendation, it would require us to have 5 classrooms in 4th grade. And then again in 5th grade with 137 students, it would require 5 classes with the flexibility to go to 27 or 28. However, with the 24 cap class, we would have 6 classes. So already, prior to the cap size at 4th and 5th, we were already 3 classes over our design capacity to deal with the cohort sizes and deal with the crowding in the school. we would now be adding 2 additional classrooms to meet the new legislative requirements. And I also want to point out, it's not just the additional classrooms that we've got the concern, it's the number of teachers that you'd need to hire. And so we know that we do have concerns about hiring teachers, not to mention teachers getting hired after the start of the school year is even more difficult. So here, we're talking about non-capacity classrooms. So these are the classrooms that are outside of the allotted 666644, okay? These would be special education classrooms, regional programs or resource rooms, ESL classrooms, speech therapy, specials like art and music, pre-K, academically gifted or computer lab, and there's many others. As we talked about in our recent Student Achievement Committee, there were comments that we would not be impacting regional program or pre-K seats in these particular buildings. So they would not be impacting classrooms. However, if we needed to take additional classrooms to fill with students as per the new legislation, we would be looking at taking classrooms to accommodate that need in these other areas. So school capacity model. So based on the 616 model that we had talked about earlier, we would have a loss of about 40 seats at traditional if the school was on the traditional calendar, and 94 seats if it was on a multi-track year-round calendar. Again, this is just based on the data of having 96 per grade level moving forward with a new capacity model. So what impacts will this have? So as we talked about the different methods that we would use to deal with crowding, reassignment of students would be one. In our areas where we have a high number of capped or overcrowded schools, we would need to do some reassignments and it would impact a larger number of families. Traditionally in our enrollment plans, we generally have impacted 1 to 3% of the student body population district-wide. And in any given year, that could range depending on the number of schools we open. It would be estimated that would approximately be about 6 to 7% of our student body population that would be impacted if we just used straight reassignment as a method to provide a solution here. The capping of additional schools, and again, we've talked about that as being a temporary solution. However, the impacts it has on transportation, and it's not just the transportation at the schools that are capped, it would be a far-reaching impact because you also have routes that would need to be changed. You would have route times. The number of buses that we have provided for a particular school would need to change. So this would impact a lot of different schools, not just the ones in those crowded areas. And then calendar changes. Looking at potential calendar change from traditional to multi-track, should we need to should we not be able to use reassignments or capping in that particular area? And again, you wouldn't be able to use this for a multi-track year-round school that's already over capacity. So at the school level, what kind of changes would we potentially see? You could see track changes for multi-track year-round students. So this would be, in order to balance your class sizes, you may see students who need to change tracks because again, your individual tracks, it's not like in a traditional calendar school where everyone's on the same calendar. If you need to balance your class sizes because you have certain ones that go over the limit and you need to open up another classroom, you would need to move students off of that track. And again, this would then affect some of the middle school families who have siblings. So this would be a far-reaching impact K-8. And then classroom changes. So for classroom changes, let me just give you a story. So if we have, let's say, 5 fifth grade classes, and they're already at 27 per class because we've used the +3 already that we're allowed. That next student that comes into the 5th grade, we would need to open up a whole other class. And so that doesn't just mean affecting that one class where you'd assign that student to make it 28. We would now be pulling students off of each of the other classes in order to open up a class of at least 12 to 15 students. The other impact comes with that is who funds that class. Because if that class needs to be opened after the 20th or 40th day, whenever we report our enrollment, our ADM, that comes from local funds. So again, that continues to put a strain on the district resources. So timeline concerns. So you're familiar with the timeline because we shared this timeline at our recent initial discussion for the enrollment plan. The item I want to bring up, though, is the timing of the legislative decision for this class size limitation. So staff will need to continue to prepare for a class size change unless we hear that it has either not been approved through the state legislature. However, the timing of that answer does affect the work that we're trying to do with our enrollment plan. As we talked about in our initial discussion, which happened at our last board meeting, we're already prepping for 24-25. And so when this proposal comes forward, it is for a 24-25 implementation. However, we are already starting to plan for our enrollment plan. And so if we don't get an answer at some time before June, we've already had to start our enrollment plan. And so we will need to start looking at impacts on individual school levels and then a district-wide level as the years go. And then just walking through, September through October through November are the different versions of the enrollment plan. So you wouldn't want to have changes to that enrollment plan after we've started. So we would want to have implemented changes at the June-September timeframe in order to make this an appropriate way to give parents enough leeway to understand the changes that would be happening for the next school year. Which talks about, the timeline for parents. Larger districts tend to need more time to implement. The K-3 class size legislation, that gave us a 3-year window to implement, which, this one would only give us a 1-year adjustment period. And then just to highlight the inequities with charter schools, they don't need to adhere to the class size legislation as public schools do. But more importantly, we have to take students when they enroll, at the time they enroll. We are not able to turn students away at any point. So that puts us at a disadvantage with trying to manage class sizes without impacting families. And so I just wanted to make that clear because it is very difficult for our schools to adjust their class sizes in a way that won't impact families. And by taking away this flexibility, this will end up starting to impact families. And with that, we'll leave it open to questions or concerns.
All right, everyone. So we heard the basic presentation of material about crowding and some of the decisions that the district makes at different points in time about remedies we can do to address crowding. And now we've also seen some real hard numbers about projections that the 4 or 5 class size limits could make to our schools. Does anyone have any questions for staff or concerns? Chair Mahaffey.
Given how long it took for the K-3 to go in and the impacts that we're still feeling from this, I would rather we start working on this as soon as possible and breathe a sigh of relief if it doesn't go into implementation, than hope that something won't happen and then have to, do assignment plan 2.0. That's just my initial gut feeling on this question.
Basically have your contingency plan built in so you can accommodate it. Okay. Other questions or comments? Dr.
You talked about magnet marketing. And what's been the reception with regards to that? And are there any ways to kind of, do anything different with that? In regard to getting more people, to look at magnet schools.
So we can continue to do print and media outreach. We also do magnet fairs. We have open houses. There's many different ways. We have small group, mini fairs, was it virtual fairs as well? Thank you. There are many ways that our magnet department gets out and markets our schools. As for what could we do differently, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. If we've been able to do something differently, they've probably tried it already, but we can certainly look for additional ways to try to reach families. One of the things that I know we've done recently is extend our enrollment period. So it used to be after, it was the first Thursday in January that we would start our open enrollment for the next school year. That has been pushed to October. And in that, the reasoning for that was so that we can start to do outreach to families earlier in October prior to the magnet fair, so we can invite them to come to the magnet fair to entice them to take advantage of that option, especially in our crowded schools.
In addition, that's afforded families more time to schedule tours, so their window isn't nearly as tight, so they have an opportunity to really investigate their choices before they're submitting their magnet application.
Right, and hopefully that'll
Encourage.
alleviate the buyer's remorse kind of
Yes.
thing that we've been talking about. Correct.
Just to follow up on that point, is there any other question about magnets and the solution, or if not, we'll go to Ms. Evans?
So my question is with regard to, did I interrupt somebody?
No, I saw a hand, but I misinterpreted.
With regard to the list on slide 24, so my understanding from our last discussion is that we are choosing not to touch pre-K classrooms, but that's a choice that we're making. How is it possible that special education classrooms are not automatically off the table based on federal law or what have you? Is it these specific types of special education classrooms?
Regional program classrooms are not ones that we would move students out of. That's correct. We leave them assigned to the school.
Oh, say that again?
We would leave the regional special ed programs assigned to that particular school.
And long-range planning works very closely with our special ed department, even going out to do individual school visits for placement for children with particular needs.
So they would be protected, those
They
classrooms?
are.
There are
They're
two
correct.
categories that are protected. Regional programs that serve special needs students and pre-K programs. In both of those programs, we have students that we are required to serve by law, and in some cases, based on their individualized education program, a separate setting. So we would not impact those two. There are other classrooms in a building that are designated as used for special education services. Those tend to be what's called a cross-categorical resource classroom, CCR, and those are students who may have an elective period where they are supported by a special education teacher, or they're in and out for portions of the day, depending on what the level is. And sometimes those classrooms can be accommodated in other spaces in the school, and it provides the school the flexibility if a CCR classroom is what they're looking to possibly capture, to have as an additional grade level classroom, that we help them manage that at the school level. But we did put a process in place, if I remember correctly, a few years ago, where some of these classrooms, when they want to make those sorts of changes, there is a review that occurs with the area superintendent, so that there is some alignment on how we're prioritizing messaging and decisions that are being made.
So with this list, there are really two. So in future presentations and future discussions, can we flag those two from this list? Because I think for a non-educator and others looking at this from the public, it would be helpful to distinguish those two spaces. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Evans. Dr. Ring, follow-up?
Well, you have a question?
That's okay. I'm good. Go ahead.
Something that I remember back when I was young, a long time ago, was that we had like a dedicated ninth grade building.
Ninth grade center.
Yeah, and I think we had something today.
We have operated ninth grade centers in the past. The one out in Garner was one of those when Garner High School was literally bursting at the seams.
Yeah.
However, we swung them into the new South Garner High School whenever it opened, and kept kids there at the 9th grade center during that time frame. However, the renovation of Garner High School allowed us additional capacity to be able to bring all of those students back to campus, as well as the additional capacity that was realized with opening South Garner with 9th and 10th graders that then aged forward. Now what we've been able to do with that 9th grade center is to use it for swing space, as we've been doing renovations for other campuses where we were not able to keep those kids on the campus. So it's not an active 9th grade center in that sense, I think.
And the reason I'm asking is, has there been talk or discussion about moving 5th grade out of elementary to give you more space, but then it is a trickling kind of rippling effect on capacity, right? So I just wanted to know what discussions have taken place.
So, I mean, yeah, 5th grade, if we had space in middle school, right? We don't.
I know, right. That's why I was saying, okay, 9th grade.
There are a number, I mean, 9th grade centers are an option. We've even talked about K2 schools, 3-5 schools, one-story schools being K2, multi-story being maybe 3-5 or K5, because you can't put kindergartners, first graders on a second floor. There are other solutions, and all of them require moving students.
As well as transportation concerns.
And transportation needs, yeah.
Ms. Caulfield?
Yeah, can you give us, well, I guess I'll start with what your question, going off of Ms. Lynn's question. When you say that you're going to cut the classrooms, am I understanding that correctly for all of these categories? But you're saying pre-K and special ed are actually protected in certain. What would be the plan for all those other programs like art and music or ESL? I mean, you can't take that out, right? AG.
So similar to what we do today to address crowding, as Marcella mentioned on the sort of warning stages, this may be something that's already happening in some of our crowded buildings where the principal's making a site-based decision to say, I'm going to take over a classroom that maybe previously was identified as one of these specials, and I'm going to work with that teacher to provide an alternate way for them to provide that programming to students. Maybe we sometimes call it art on a cart. They might be on a cart and then push into classrooms to provide that specials time versus the students leaving their classroom to come down to an art classroom. So since we're already, right, maybe having music on a stage, those types of things. And so if that's not our preferred delivery method, but it is a delivery method we can use, we're saying that we might extend that into this space as well. That if we need to identify classrooms for 4th and 5th grade, we might go back to that same strategy and see if that would work. And some schools, if they're already doing it, then we have to go to the next.
And again, like capping, these would be temporary considerations. We do not want these to be long-term solutions.
Right, but what would we be waiting for in the long term? Like, I mean, because we just keep having to deal with more and more people
Depending on
coming
the growth in the area. So if you have growth that will eventually slow over time, you can wait for that growth to slow down as opposed to impacting families through a reassignment or capping. That is the hope. However, as Ms. Rory brought up, school choice, parent choice continues to change our data on a day-to-day basis. And there are many factors that go into why parents make the choices they do.
Okay, and then my other question is, could you define or clarify, I guess, the difference terminology-wise between capped and at capacity?
Rock, paper, scissors.
I know those two kind of get mixed up a lot, so I'm just, for people listening, if you can clarify it.
When we bring capping recommendations to the board, we always bring a recommended cap number. So say, for example, if the school's capacity is at 2240, and with 6 trailers, and I'm using a high school as an example here, 6 trailers that would add 144 seats, which would take us to 23, Susan, thank you, take us to that number. Typically, we don't recommend that exact number as the cap number. There's usually some percentage over that, and we work with the school in looking at what their current strengths are, the number of students they have in each class, to give a recommendation to the board on what a cap number should be. So I'll turn it over to Susan as to
Functionally, right.
Exactly.
So once that decision has been made and we know the difference between the capacity of the building versus the capped number that we don't really want to exceed, then we start to operationalize that. Capacity for a school, any school, is a number that we go by to guide us as we're trying to determine how many students to assign to the school, how large the attendance area should be, whether additional magnet applications should be accepted, whether transfers would be reasonable, etc. Once we get to the point where the board has identified an official cap number, that school has moved into a different phase where we now are restricting all transfers and applications. We're focusing just on serving students who live in the base attendance area. And at some point, if there are more students enrolling from that base attendance area than that cap number, we start actually assigning them to a different school temporarily until such a time as the school enrollment drops and we can call them back. So when we say at capacity, that's a standard number we would use for any school in the district to say if their capacity is 616 and there are 620 students at the school, they're at capacity. They're not capped. Any student who's living in the base attendance area can still come in and enroll, especially if they move in during the school year. There's no restrictions from that perspective. Yet, if they've gotten to that stage where the board has officially approved a cap and identified the overflow school, that's what changes, is that we can no longer guarantee that if you live in the base attendance area that there'll be a seat for you.
So would it be fair to recap what you just said? Sure. Thank you for that. The capacity is basically the number that fit comfortably, and this is just loosely defining it. Crowding is when it's getting real close, and capping is when it's like, no more. We can't.
Well, if I can, to clarify, just because it's over capacity or over more doesn't mean it's capped.
Correct.
Right. The capping is a special status. Would you like to clarify?
I was going to say capping is a board action.
Right.
Okay? So if we're implementing capping, that's a board action. The others are ranges and monitoring that is happening that does trigger some things like how we're looking at transfers, how we're looking at applications, those kinds of things. But when we're saying even if you move into the neighborhood, you cannot attend his school, that's capping, and that's subsequent to a board action.
So if you have somebody that, and this question just came up to me actually 3 times in the past 2 weeks by different people, Heritage, I know that name comes up all the time. They are capped, but not at full capacity. Is that correct?
Okay. Right.
As an example,
so this,
because I know they're
perfect
alone.
example. So the distinction is once the board has gotten to a point where we've all recognized that a school is really at that precarious point where they're going to hit that uncomfortable capped number,
Right.
we set that number. If there's a time period where the enrollment hasn't come very quickly or if it hasn't actually hit that number, then we are allowed to continue to enroll students at that school until such a time as it actually reaches that volume for enrollment. So Heritage High School currently, at its current state, hasn't hit that number just yet. So all students moving into the base are still able to register at the school. However, if and when they hit that cap number, then that next student moving into the neighborhood or the community would have to go to the overflow school.
But right now, as of a couple of days ago, they literally had more students than the capacity for that campus.
But not yet hit the cap number.
Had not hit the cap number.
So we're not approving transfers
Right.
into the school.
Correct.
But if families lived in the base attendance area, they would get a seat at the school at this current time.
Okay.
And to sort of plug it back to Ms. Moore's definition, since the cap is a board action, that action's been taken and it's sitting there ready for us to use when the time comes. In other cases, we were over the cap on the day that you approved the cap, so the very next student that registered got sent to the overflow school. So it just depends on the timing of when the cap is approved.
Right, so if you have a capped school and somebody comes in, you go back and look at the numbers and then you either
Correct.
say, well, we're at capacity, can't do it,
Right.
or, okay, you're
So as a public
crowded.
service announcement, please go to that base school because
Yeah.
there's a chance there might be a seat for you. Please go there first. And then they would work with you to determine whether or not you would need to be sent to the overflow school.
And this was in reference to people buying homes
Right.
in the area, worried that they would go through that whole process only to find out that,
Right.
which could always change anyways.
Yes.
All right, thank you, Ms. Caulfield. Are there other questions at this time from anyone on the committee? I know you've presented a lot of potential solutions. I know some of them are very facilities related, right? Build more schools, which requires more capital. Trailers we've talked about before as a stopgap, but then also cost money. Some of these other solutions you've talked about, though, would require more collaboration with our academic office, such if you wanted to create a 5th grade center or a 9th grade center, or looking at the structure of the magnet programs. So anything we do going forward is going to go beyond just facilities. Is that correct? And I think what's troubling in a lot of these cases is that there are options that aren't really options for us. In Western Wake County, if our elementary schools, have to implement these class size limits, they're already multi-track year-round, so changing the calendar is not an option. So that just forces reassignment and destabilization on those families, which bring up the transportation issues, problems for parents, and then kids moving further and further out of their neighborhoods. Is that right?
And just to reiterate, as we did when we implemented K-3, we tried to limit the impact on families as much as possible, and we'll continue to do that.
And so just a question too, and it might be more on the academic side, so it may, if you can't answer, but the superintendent can. With our magnet program, I know one of the things that some parents choose not to explore a magnet route, explain that the distance from their homes to the magnets are so far. But we have very specific criteria for what kind of school can be magnetized in order to qualify for the federal grants that fund the programs. I know we also have a small number of locally funded magnets. Would we ever look to magnetize a school that might not hit the federal requirements, but for capacity reasons or crowding relief? Is that something we would ever look at locally, to take maybe one of our Eastern Cary area schools and use that as a more proximate option for some of those families who won't come all the way to our traditional magnet neighborhoods?
So we have had locally funded magnets. We may, do we still have some that are locally funded? I think we do. We do still have some locally funded magnets. Yeah, and actually, I think when the 5 schools that are in current grant, we thought we might can only do 4, and we might have to request local funding for the other. But in looking at the programming, we felt comfortable putting all 5 on the grant. Yes, is the short answer. It does go on the table with all the other local needs.
Thank you.
So along that line of thinking, how would that compare to offering very strategically placed special programs that don't rise to the level of magnet school? For example, and you and I talked a little bit about this some months ago, the digital learning program at Middle Creek High School, for example.
So
without competing with, yeah.
So it is important to look at programming in a school, in a region, and for the district. Right? You have to look at it in all of those spaces, because when you open a program for non-base students, if that's what you're doing, you have to define it really well. We do right now the programs like the digital program that you're talking about, Middle Creek, it's a CTE program that's for the base students. It is not for non-base students. Our ROTC programs are for the base students, not for non-base students. So when a program is open to non-base students, we've tried to make sure that was some sort of an application or magnet in order to keep that distinction.
So would that be the preference if we needed to explore something like that, would be to fully?
I just want to make a plug for Magnet, though, because it feels like we're only talking about Magnet in the sense that it's relieving crowding at our crowded schools. It is our integration effort. And so I don't want to lose sight of that, because it is a voluntary integration effort that our district for decades has used and has been very successful, is nationally recognized for. And so I fear that as you start to add additional programming throughout the district strategically placed, it may affect the applications into magnet schools and will not allow us to achieve the goals we've achieved to this point.
Yep.
So
No,
I think we'll be very
understood.
careful about that conversation.
And as a mostly magnet parent, not 100%, but I support the goals and objectives of the magnet system, why we have it, how we, our intentions, and the health of the overall district. So,
Any final comments or questions on this topic? I know this is one that obviously has clear facilities implications, but it'll have budget implications and finance if we have to hire more teachers for the classrooms. It'll have student achievement impacts when you start looking at, spreading out, sort of thinning our teacher resources over more classrooms. So I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to talk to it again, but we really appreciate you. Ms.
I
Johnson.
do have a question, which I could save to finance, which I was, but until you brought this up, and sorry, I'm not on your committee. Because I can't remember this from K-3 class size. Does our ADM amount change and fluctuate since we're reducing the class size?
No, we are currently funded at 24. So there are not additional funds in the legislation because that is the limit at which we are currently funded. But the flexibility that we're able to use, because you've heard me say this before, children do not come in nice, neat little packages of 24, goes away, and it will require additional resources disparately across the district based on where you go over.
Saw Ms. Caulfield's hand. Are there any other final questions before Chairman Haffey and Ms. Caulfield, and then you'll finish it up? Okay.
So what, essentially, we're going back to our initial worry with K-3 class size with 4-5 in the 24 allotment, that for those schools that are using those additional monies to have like a STEM or a science special included, or a drama special, or Spanish. They may go away.
Or on the extra third grade teachers, so that the district doesn't have to.
That's right.
Also that.
Right.
Yeah.
Or an additional IA to provide more support in the classroom that has a larger class size, so that they're managing their resources. Those flexibilities go away.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Ms. Caulfield, final question.
I just wanted to back up for a second with the magnet, and if you wouldn't, Mr. Cruz, so can you speak to the purpose of the magnet program? Because you brought up that it's nationally recognized, and I think it's important for people to understand why and what it does.
And that is a topic. That is a topic that might well exceed
okay.
the time that we have.
That's what I read.
We'll give you a.
I can repeat the highlights that I gave on slide 6.
wasn't on slide 6.
So our magnet schools not only help reduce high concentrations of poverty, it promotes diversity and school integration, provides innovative and/or expanded educational opportunities, and helps us to maximize our the use of our school facilities.
Okay. Well, I did actually hear that. Now that you mentioned that.
Oh, you're
but
fine.
what I'm saying more to Lynn's point, when you said I want people to understand that it is like I wouldn't want it to take away from that. Because it does seem like a program that you put something into school to kind of attract people in, so we could kind of mix the numbers around. But when you said that, it made it sound like there was more to it that people should hear. If I heard wrong, that's it. That's
Well, I'll
okay.
definitely say it's a choice mechanism that helps support the district's goals. And so I think it's really important because while they are further away, the draw areas are meant to draw students from our overcrowded schools, generally our more affluent areas, to bring them to areas so we don't have high concentrations of poverty.
So if you just move them from school to school but didn't meet those goals, it would have been meeting the goals.
Or underutilized schools.
Yeah. All right. Well, we are past our meeting time. We still have 2 other items really quickly. Is there any new business before the committee? I know that Mr. Hershey had wanted us to bring up at a future meeting some of the issues around bottle fillers and bottle filling devices. I believe, Mr. Strickland, you all will be prepared to talk about that in a future meeting. Are there any other pressing topics right now? All right. If not, I'll turn it over to Mr. Condon for our 3-month forecast.
forecast in front of you. I want to highlight a few items as we look into our next board meeting on May 16th, which will be next week. We plan to bring GP number 2. As we discussed earlier today, you talked about the combo middle school, high school, so that'll be coming to you all. That's one highlight coming for that meeting. As we move into the month of June, that first board meeting, which would be June 6th, there are a few items to highlight in that particular meeting. We have CO number 5, which is GMP4 for Felton Grove High School. We have GMP4 for Hilltop Needmore Road Elementary School. We plan to bring the CM contract for North Garner Middle School, which is the first of the next round of the new projects. Okay, that's going to be a major renovation. And then we will also potentially, it's a maybe, be bringing GMP number 1 for another one of the next round, which is Pleasant Plains Elementary School, which is currently in design. We will likely have some stuff coming in the second board meeting of June. We're still kind of working through some things, and we'll see how that evolves organically over the next couple of weeks. June Facilities Committee meeting will be coming up, of course, and we will look to there'll be June 14th, excuse me, and we'll look to the possibility of having a land acquisition 101 in that meeting. Okay? Any questions?
All right, no question, Mr. Combs.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, if there's no other business before the committee, we'll declare it adjourned.
Still aren't actually done, right?
They did not. I don't know if they moved it.
Long day.